February 14th, 2026, at exactly 10:17 in the morning, became the timestamp that will be cited in legal textbooks and played in documentaries for decades. And you're hearing about it while the shock is still settling. You've already seen the headlines flooding your feed, the notifications lighting up your phone about a former president having an, quote, emotional breakdown in court. And you're probably wondering if this is just more clickbait drama. It isn't. What happened inside that sealed federal courtroom wasn't just another uncomfortable day for the defense. It was the moment when 18 months of carefully constructed legal strategy collapsed in less than 20 minutes because the one person the defense assumed would never break ranks walked to the witness stand and calmly dismantled every foundational claim they had built. If you're listening right now, it's because you sense that something fundamental shifted, that this wasn't just another hearing in an endless parade of motions and delays, but the inflection point where a document retention argument transformed into a full-blown obstruction and national security prosecution. You don't get that kind of reaction from speculation or leaked rumors. You only get it when someone with direct personal knowledge sits under oath and describes in precise detail exactly what happened after federal agents demanded classified materials back and were told everything had been returned. The instant the courtroom doors opened and the witness stepped through, you could feel the air change. Defense attorneys who had spent a year and a half projecting confidence through every pretrial motion, every public statement, every camera appearance, suddenly looked like people who had just opened an envelope containing very bad news. The swagger evaporated. The casual posture disappeared because they knew what was coming, and they had no tool in their arsenal to stop it. Their entire strategy had been built on a foundation of plausible deniability. Too many boxes, too much chaos during a transition, a busy former office holder who couldn't possibly know what staff packed where. The theory was simple. This was a paperwork dispute, not a crime. Then came the first question, calm and almost routine, asking whether the witness had observed the defendant personally handling classified materials at a private residence after the government had already issued demands for their return. The answer was immediate, direct, with no hesitation and no request for clarification. Yes, multiple occasions, kept in a private study. In that instant, the lack of knowledge defense didn't just crack, it shattered. You could see it in the way papers started shuffling at the defense table, in the frantic whispered conferences, in the way one attorney knocked over a water glass and nobody bothered to clean it up. When your own family member places you at the scene of federal crimes, no amount of legal maneuvering can undo that damage. Then came the photograph. In high-stakes prosecutions, documents can be debated and memories can be challenged, but images are brutal. When the prosecutor approached the stand holding a manila folder and pulled out what was logged as Exhibit 247, the room went still. Displayed on every monitor in that courtroom was a photograph of a private study, a familiar desk, and scattered across its surface were documents bearing classification markings from United States intelligence agencies. Taken in July 2024, months after subpoenas, months after sworn certifications of compliance, months after the defendant himself had stated under oath that everything had been returned. The photo wasn't a leak from a disgruntled staffer or a blurry image from an unknown source. It was taken deliberately by someone inside the inner circle, someone who had every personal reason to protect the defendant, but instead documented what was happening because they understood the legal storm that was coming. When asked to identify what was visible in the image, the witness didn't equivocate. Classified intelligence briefings from the CIA and NSA. When asked who had been handling those documents when the picture was taken, there was a pause, a slow turn toward the defense table, and then a single word that landed like a bomb: the defendant. That is the moment observers in the gallery say the former president visibly broke, not with shouting or the theatrical outburst the public has come to expect, but with a quiet collapse inward, the kind of stillness that comes when denial becomes impossible and the legal fiction constructed to protect someone finally shatters against the wall of evidence. But the testimony wasn't finished. The questioning moved to conversations from August 2024, discussions about what to do if investigators returned to the property. The answer was direct and devastating. The defendant had said they needed to move sensitive materials somewhere safe, specifically the ones he referred to as his presidential souvenirs. That phrase will echo through every stage of this prosecution, through the trial, through the inevitable appeals, through the history books. Because you cannot claim something is a personal keepsake when it bears top secret markings, when it contains active intelligence about foreign military capabilities, when relocating it after receiving a subpoena constitutes a federal felony. Presidential souvenirs. The words of someone who believed the rules did not apply to him, spoken to a family member who just repeated them under oath in a federal courtroom. The timeline that emerged from this testimony was devastating to the defense. These conversations about moving documents occurred after the FBI had issued its subpoena, after the defendant's own attorneys had submitted a sworn certification of full compliance, after the defendant himself had stated under oath that all classified materials had been returned. In legal terms, this checks every single box for obstruction of justice. First, knowledge that an investigation exists. Second, intent to impede that investigation. Third, concrete actions taken to accomplish that goal. The witness described all three: awareness of the FBI investigation, discussions about relocating materials to avoid detection, and actual steps taken to move classified documents after swearing everything had been given back. That is not a close call. That is the textbook definition prosecutors use when they teach obstruction to new attorneys. What makes this testimony uniquely devastating is the identity of the witness. In federal prosecutions, cooperating witnesses always face credibility challenges. Defense teams attack their motives, highlight their plea deals, suggest their testimony was purchased with promises of leniency. None of those attacks work here. This is not a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. This is not a criminal seeking to reduce a sentence by implicating others. This is not a political operative with partisan motivations. This is the defendant's own daughter. Juries inherently trust family members, even when those family members testify against their own blood, because there is something fundamentally credible about a witness who has every personal reason to protect the defendant, but chooses truth instead. Defense attorneys understand this dynamic perfectly. That is why cross-examination was brief and cautious. Any aggressive questioning would only make the witness more sympathetic to the jury. Any attempt to discredit her would simply remind jurors that this is a daughter forced to choose between family loyalty and sworn honesty. The defense was trapped, and they knew it. That is why the lead attorney called for a recess immediately after testimony concluded, why the entire defense team huddled around their client, not to strategize, but to calculate damage and survival, why observers said it looked less like a legal conference and more like people trying to figure out who might be next in the government's crosshairs. Behind the courtroom drama sits a much larger question, one that should concern every person who has ever held a security clearance or served in a position of public trust. This case is no longer about whether someone accidentally retained a few documents during a chaotic move. It is about whether a former president of the United States can treat operational intelligence products as personal property, hide them from federal investigators, and face no consequences. The documents described in testimony are not bureaucratic paperwork. They are real-time assessments of foreign military capabilities, details about covert operations, information that could endanger American lives if disclosed. Every intelligence analyst, every military officer, every diplomat with access to classified information is watching this prosecution and asking the same question. If the person who once held the highest office in the land can ignore these rules, why should anyone else follow them? The entire classification system depends on universal enforcement, on the principle that the rules apply equally regardless of position or power. If that principle collapses here, the system collapses with it. When the witness described a phone call from December 2024, just 3 days before a scheduled FBI compliance review, in which the defendant allegedly told her to make sure the cleaning crew did not throw away anything important from the study, prosecutors immediately flagged it for further investigation. That call was not about protecting personal mementos. It was about concealing classified documents from an imminent inspection. It demonstrates consciousness of guilt, ongoing obstruction, even after multiple subpoenas, systematic concealment, rather than accidental retention. The witness also revealed something that sent another shockwave through the courtroom. Other family members were present during several conversations about document handling. In a single answer, the door opened to testimony from siblings, to a potential conspiracy that extends beyond one defendant to an entire inner circle. The prosecution now has a roadmap to every person who might have witnessed criminal conduct, every conversation about moving materials, every discussion about hiding documents from investigators. And buried in all of this is another quiet revelation that explains why the defense looked like they were attending their own funeral. This testimony was not spontaneous. It was part of a comprehensive cooperation agreement. The immunity deal negotiated by the witness does not just cover what was said on the stand, it covers documents provided to prosecutors, documents that allegedly show a pattern of obstruction going back 18 months. That photograph of the private study was not a random family snapshot. According to the terms of immunity, it was taken deliberately on the advice of the witness's own attorney because she understood what was coming and wanted to protect herself. Think about what that means. The defendant's own daughter was building a legal defense against him while still attending family dinners, documenting potential crimes while he believed she remained a loyal member of his inner circle, constructing a case for prosecutors while constructing immunity for herself. The constitutional implications are staggering. The Department of Justice now faces a choice that no previous generation of prosecutors has ever confronted. Pursue full prosecution of a former president based on direct, photographic, corroborated evidence from his own family, or effectively declare that presidents are above the law. There is no middle ground. There is no compromise position. Either the law applies to everyone or it applies to no one. What happens next will define how accountability works in American democracy for generations. The machinery of justice is now in motion. Grand jury sessions are scheduled. Additional witnesses are being interviewed. Prosecutors are preparing what may be the most consequential set of charges in modern history. The system worked today in the sense that truth surfaced, that evidence hidden for months is now part of the public record, that crimes allegedly concealed are now documented under oath. But the harder test is still ahead. Whether that system continues working when the full weight of accountability must be applied to someone who once held the most powerful office on earth. The trial continues, the evidence keeps mounting, and justice, however slowly, moves forward. The next chapter begins Monday morning in federal court, and what happens there will echo far beyond this case, this defendant, or this moment. It will answer the question of whether our institutions are still stronger than any individual, whether the law still means something when it becomes inconvenient for the powerful, and whether accountability is still possible when it costs the most.